All right, I think we are live, everyone, ready to go. If you can let me know if nobody can. So perfect. I'm up here and sit next to you, Travis.
Welcome aboard.
Perfect. So hopefully everybody can see me. I'm Rachel Gonzalez. I'm the Public Information Officer for the Northwest region, and I'm going to kick the meeting off. Sorry for the, got it, Braxton. Perfect. I apologize for the delay.
And the echo.
And the echo. We had a bit of some technical difficulties. Okay. Yay, now we should be good. So again, I am Rachel Gonzalez. I am the Public Information Officer for the Northwest region, and I am here to kick off our Sportsperson Caucus. So just a couple ground rules this evening. We will be doing presentations that will have the ability to ask questions after that presentation. Towards the end of the meeting, we will also have the opportunity for you to ask questions in the chat feed on YouTube. Myself and one of our customer service representatives, Braxton, will be helping answer those questions. So please be patient with us. Sometimes there is a bit of a lag, so we may not get to all of them tonight, but we will make sure to answer your questions when we're able to. I'm going to actually turn the meeting over to Travis Black, our Northwest Regional Manager.
Thank you, Rachel, and welcome everybody. Sorry for the delay. It's almost a guarantee if you put me and technology together, something's going to go wrong, right? Dean's shaking his head yes. So probably don't even have to have technology, wouldn't be my guess. But welcome everybody to the Northwest Sportspersons Caucus meeting. We have a fairly lengthy agenda tonight, and we'll try to get through it, especially starting a little bit late here. But we'll stay a little bit extra if we need to make sure we get through the agenda in time. So are delegates on? Can we tell?
Yes, so I do. Would you like your video turned on?
Can we hear him?
Mr. Terwilliger?
I told you it's a guarantee. You put me in front of technology, it's going to go wrong. So
We can go ahead and get into the
agenda.
updates. Work with Mr. Terwilliger to get his microphone working.
Yeah, once you get him working, if you would let me know. I want to give him an opportunity to have the floor, and our two delegates help form the agenda for this evening. They brought some issues forward that they would like us to cover, and thus our agenda for this evening. Can we tell if any of the commissioners are on at this time as well?
Yes, Commissioner Adams and Commissioner Black are on, and I'm working with Commissioner Bates so we can get her on as well.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to welcome Commissioner Adams and Commissioner Blacka sitting in on our Sportspersons Caucus this evening. And if they have anything they'd like to say, we'll certainly give them an opportunity to chime in as well. So with that said, we'll just kind of jump into our agenda this evening so we can kind of move forward. And I'd like to start out with our area updates. In the Northwest, we have 5 different areas, area 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And let's see, is Bill on?
Yes.
Why don't we kick it to Bill to do an area update real quickly? Anything that's going on up in that Meeker country, Bill?
Perfect, Bill. You have been muted.
Can you guys hear me at all? Can you hear me? Can you hear
He's either
me?
being really quiet or we can't hear him.
Yeah, Bill, this is Chris Middledorf. I can hear you online. I don't know if they can hear you in Grand Junction.
Why don't we move on with somebody that's in the room, Rachel?
Yes.
And then we'll come back to the area for their updates. I apologize. we continue to have some technical difficulties here, so let's, I'm gonna skip over Brad because he's online. He's not here in person, right?
So Brad. But it's.
Yeah, we can do that. Kirk, you want to come up and kind of give a brief, Area 7 updates?
Good evening, Kirk Oldham. I'm the area wildlife manager here in Area 7. I'm out of Grand Junction. And just give you a couple of brief updates of some things that we certainly need input from our public on going on in Area 7. One is changing the management strategy of the Grand Mesa elk. We're looking to limit archery season up on the Grand Mesa. That's E14. And we'll be looking at doing that this next year. One of the things that we're asking for input from our public on that has an interest in the Grand Mesa elk management to engage on that and keep apprised of and keep tuned into our webpage for a survey and for the update on that. We have not put that out as of yet, but we will be putting that out maybe as early as this weekend. So the second update that I have is, and it's more global, it's more statewide. And it has to do with sportspersons that use state wildlife areas. State wildlife areas are managed for wildlife habitat, managed for hunting and fishing, wildlife watching, wildlife use. And we certainly are, as we see an increase over the last number of years of the use of our state wildlife areas. And we are looking at modifying or changing some of the general provision regulations on the state wildlife areas. So we'll be going to the November commission meeting with potential changes to that, but we certainly need sportspersons to engage on that process because those state wildlife areas are for wildlife related recreation. So hope you'll get engaged on that.
And Kirk, maybe real quick, just for the audience, describe what Area 7 is. And we're used to those terms, but they may not
Out of Grand
understand.
Junction, so all the way from the Utah border, all the way to Newcastle, so Mesa and Garfield counties.
Thanks, Kirk. Appreciate that. So, Matt, you want to come up next?
Good evening. I'm Matt Yamashita. I'm the area wildlife manager for Glenwood Springs area that encompasses the Roaring Fork and Eagle Vale valleys. Just a couple quick kind of updates on things that are going on in our world over there. As is normal, I mean, it's kind of becoming a routine, fairly mundane topic, but bear conflicts that's what our staff does. I mean, every summer, no surprise to anybody in the state. That's what we're spending probably 90% of our time doing. It's something that I hate sounding like a broken record. Obviously, something that we would like to figure out a way to get out of this cycle and this routine. Something that nobody signs up to have to deal with human wildlife conflicts, but something that it's starting to drive more and more of our state. So our staff's pretty burdened with that, and it takes away from our ability to tend to other topics, other management concerns. One of the other things that's been going on that we're seeing the trend on this one as well, has to do with our water situation. So specifically in the Colorado River, Roaring Fork, and Eagle River areas that are managed out of Glenwood Springs. High water temps, low flows, high turbidity, which just means, we're seeing a lot of the sediment where the water's murky. We're in, I don't know, I think some of our aquatic staff will talk about it a little bit later, but it seems like it's more of the annual trend now where we've got fishing closures, voluntary fishing closures in place. It's awesome. The public's responding really, really well to it, and they're refraining from fishing. But obviously, it's not something that we want to take those angling opportunities away from the public. We're just doing it to protect the resource, and that's what the hand that the resource is dealing us right now. But something that we're, as wildlife managers, we're having to work with some of that. Again, something that it's more routine now. We're on that trend, and we're seeing it every year, and it's impacting more and more of our waters. So I know that in our area, we're not the only ones experiencing that. There's others in the region, but between those two things, kind of some of the big topics that have kind of come to the forefront this summer.
Thanks, Matt. And did you talk about your geographical area as well? What you covered?
Yeah, Area 8 is comprised of the Roaring Fork and the Eagle and Vale valleys.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate that. So
I think we finally got our technology figured out here, hopefully. So, Mr. Terwilliger, I'm gonna unmute you and then just have you do a quick welcome.
Can you guys hear me?
This is Brad. We can hear you online.
Can anybody hear me in Grand Junction?
maybe, maybe not.
All right, Mr. Terwilliger, you should be able to. I see him talking
Can you hear me?
for some reason.
Hello?
Hey, Bill, we can hear you online. I think they're working through some technical issues to be able to open your mic for you
We'll
on
keep
that end.
working on this, so I guess we can go into, so we will probably have to skip ahead to the Northwest Region Aquatic update, just because Brad is virtual. So we will keep working on the technology and go from there.
Yeah, Bob, I apologize. We'll eventually get you on here, I hope. So let's go to Ben. Are you ready for the Northwest Region Aquatic updates?
Yes, sir.
Sorry.
All right, well, thanks for being here, everybody, tonight. And my name's Ben Felt, and I'm the senior aquatic biologist here in the Northwest region. And I'm very new in this position. So I started as of a couple weeks ago and really wanted to start tonight with introducing the aquatic biologists in the region and what we do and what offices folks are out of. So like I said, my name's Ben, and I recently moved into Lori Martin's old position. So she was the senior aquatic biologist here in the Northwest for quite some time. And then prior to that, I was in the Grand Junction area aquatic biologist position. So making our way through the region here, we do have an aquatic biologist in all of the area offices throughout the Northwest region. So we have Tori Iyer in Meeker, John Ewert in Hot Sulphur Springs, Billy Atkinson in Steamboat Springs, and Kendall Backich in Glenwood Springs. And we also have a region-wide native fish biologist or native aquatic species biologist that up until a couple weeks ago was Jen Logan, and she recently accepted a promotion. So right now with me being in the new role and having a couple positions to backfill with some of the transition we've been seeing as a group with Northwest Aquatics, we are in a time of transition right now with some people in new positions. And with introducing you to everybody, I did have a couple specific updates tonight based on a couple of the agenda items that were recommended from one of the delegates. So first update I have, and Matt started to talk about this some, is just with these midsummer months and seeing low flows in the river systems here in the Northwest region and higher water temperatures, voluntary fishing closures are really becoming kind of an annual thing that we're looking at every year to protect the resource. So what we're doing out there is we're closely monitoring river flows and also temperatures within the river just to keep an eye on things and monitor the conditions on the ground. And we do that a couple ways. We can use temperature loggers that we install throughout some of these river systems and download those to see what the temperatures are. And we can also look at some permanent gauges that are in some of these rivers throughout the Northwest USGS gauges and things like that to keep an eye on temperatures that way as well. And what we do.
That's me. I
Oh,
apologize.
Oh, no problem. And so what we'll do is as temperatures start to approach 71 degrees, that's kind of the point at which we can start to look at these voluntary fishing closures. And also we're looking at flows as well. And when those temperatures start to exceed 71 degrees, that's when we have the option of considering these sorts of closures. And just to bring you up to speed on some of the closures that we have in the region right now that are ongoing and active is on the Eagle River. There is an afternoon voluntary closure from Walcott downstream to Eagle. And from Eagle downstream to the confluence with the Colorado River, it's a voluntary full day closure on that stretch. And then moving into the Colorado River, we have a voluntary full day fishing closure from Red Dirt Creek downstream to Rifle. And moving into the Yampa River now, there is a voluntary full day closure from Chuck Lewis State Wildlife Area downstream to the western edge of Steamboat Springs. And then the final one is on the Fraser River from Fraser downstream to the Colorado River confluence. And that one is an afternoon voluntary closure. And then really the last topic I wanted to discuss tonight, once again, this is based on one of the agenda items that was provided by one of our delegates, is looking at trout bag limits in the wilderness. And the thought behind this, and we're seeing it too, is there's more people in the backcountry right now than we've ever seen before these last few years. And, you know, we see that when we're out surveying these waters, more people are outside fishing and just recreating in general. So that is certainly a trend that we've noticed. And the recommendation for conversation on this agenda item was to discuss potentially revisiting some of these trout bag limits based on the increased activity in these wilderness areas or backcountry areas, and looking at if there's a need to reduce these bag limits based on that increased use. And one of the big things that we do as aquatic biologists is the aquatic biologists all throughout the region are actively monitoring the fisheries throughout the region and going out there and collecting data, conducting fish sampling surveys to see what's going on in these waters. And we use that data to look at a number of factors, including the health of fish in the system, fish densities, and we can track those fish densities through time using that information that's gathered during these surveys. And really the whole point of that is to use the information gathered during these surveys to further inform our fisheries management at specific waters. So let's say our data does indicate that there's decline in densities at a certain high mountain cutthroat trout fishery. What we can start to look at in that specific water is what options do we have? So we can either increase stocking or look at changing the bag and possession limits in that water. But that's basically the nuts and bolts of how we're managing these fisheries, is using data to adapt our strategies and manage these fisheries more efficiently based on that data. So in this case, we'll continue to monitor fisheries across the region, including these fisheries in the wilderness actively to look at fishery data trends in these fisheries and see if there are any sorts of declines. Then of course we can address those through our fisheries management strategies at that point. But in terms of applying a broad change to regulations for a large group of waters, such as wilderness waters, the way we manage fisheries is that's more on a specific water basis based on the data that we have for that water. So hopefully that helps address that agenda item and what our strategy is for monitoring and managing those fisheries.
Thanks, Ben. Appreciate that. And Garrett had to remind me, I'm terrible at introducing people, but you know, we do want to welcome Ben aboard as the new senior aquatic biologist, and you know, recognize Lori for her years of service as well, retiring at the end of the month. Is that right, Lori? So thank you for everything you've done over the years, and hope you don't disappear on us. You know, don't be a stranger. So but welcome aboard, Ben, and thank you.
Thank you.
All right, are we gonna try to go online again or?
We don't have any questions through YouTube, but if we have any questions from the audience.
Okay.
I do think I figured out what our issue is.
So any questions for Ben on his aquatic updates or throw him a curveball? We'll test him a little bit. So
Thanks.
nobody?
Well, I got it. So are you actually measuring impacts at this point in these more remote locations?
So in these more remote locations, we continue them to survey them through time like we traditionally have been. And so far, based on my conversations with the biologists, we haven't seen this widespread sort of data to suggest that there are declines despite there being more use. You know, like I said, we're kind of looking at that on a water specific basis. And I think part of what's driving that is in a lot of these wilderness waters, these high mountain lakes, even if there is more fishing pressure, a lot of folks just don't seem to harvest fish in those situations. Seems to be a lot more catch and release.
Thanks, Dean. Great questions. No online questions or anything yet? Anybody else from the field out there? All right. Well, thanks, Ben. Appreciate it. So.
I think we have it figured out. Let's see if I can manage 2 mice.
Are you gonna try to go back to Bob?
Yeah, we're gonna try.
Okay.
So hold on. Just here.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you online. Hello.
Okay, Bill.
Hello. Apparently you still cannot hear me.
Bill, we can hear you if you want to just keep talking.
Okay. Well, I'm not necessarily good at that, but I guess we'll give her a try. So, I'll introduce myself as Bill DeVerge, Area Wildlife Manager. I'm based out of Meeker. I cover what we call Area 6, which is the northwest corner of the state, bounded by Utah, Wyoming, includes Moffett, Rio Blanco counties, parts of Routt and Garfield counties. Good updates this year, I guess. A little bit extra moisture this year than in the past. We've obviously been in a terrible drought like the rest of the state, but this year's a little better. High country's been seeing some good moisture. Some of our lower winter range western country is at least getting adequate moisture. Areas continuing to work on a lot of projects. We've got a lot of water projects, development going on. We've got some habitat improvement projects, some interseeding, some shrub manipulation, all these kind of projects on both state wildlife areas and on private property in association with our habitat partnership programs we run up here in both Craig and Meeker. Other than that, I'd say it just looks like it's shaping up to be a good hunting season. We're anticipating getting a lot of folks back in the field this year and having great opportunities, and I'll probably end it with that.
Great.
Thanks, Bill. I appreciate it. I hope you can hear me. We heard you fine. So, do we have anybody from Area 10,
Yes, we do. Jeremy is on.
Area 9?
Yep. Oh, sorry, Chris and Jeremy. So we'll go with area 10. So Chris, I'm gonna unmute you.
Fantastic. Can you hear me there in Grand Junction?
Yes.
Excellent. Good evening, everybody. Chris Middledorf, Area Wildlife Manager up here in Routt County in Jackson County. We got a small sliver of a couple other counties as well, but primarily those two locations. Just give you a brief update. Well, first off, I want to say good evening to Commissioner Bleck and Commissioner Adams as well. Thank you very much for joining us from the east side of the state. As an update, really, we're doing pretty good up here. We've had significant water. We have good monsoon flows. You've already heard from our aquatic staff that we do have a voluntary closure on the Yampa River due to low flows. But overall, compared to the past 2 or 3 years, we're doing much better than a lot of other places in the state. And also, I think those conditions are going to hopefully lead into a fall with a very good hunting season coming up. As Bill said, I think this northern part of the state is doing a lot better. A couple other items. One is that we actually expanded our moose hunting opportunities, Unit 14 to Units 4 and 5 as well. And I think that's just great efforts and great management by CPW along with our sports people on having that moose herd expand and hopefully some opportunities to hunt a little bit further northern Colorado. And then the last item that I want to bring up to for anybody who's listening or gets a chance to listen to this in the future, if hunting in Jackson County this year and for the years to come, please make sure you're looking out for wolves. If you're coyote hunting, please make sure that you're really doing a double check on what you're aiming at, because we do have a pack of wolves that are still in Jackson County, and we're doing everything we can to protect those animals as well. So that's all I have for Area 10. Thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate that quick update. So let's go to Jeremy up in Area 9 if we got him on.
We do have him on.
Good evening, everyone. It's Jeremy Huntington. I'm the Area Wildlife Manager for Area 9, which primarily covers Grand County and Summit County. We've been fortunate enough here in the last few weeks to be getting some pretty good monsoon moisture similar to Area 10. So that's helped out a lot. We've actually had a pretty good summer, and as far as I recall in recent time, it's probably one of the first summers we have not had fire restrictions across the area. So we've been sitting pretty good with that, and that's been really helping the fire recovery efforts that have been ongoing. The BLM and the Forest Service and county and state partners have been doing a lot of work for fire restoration. Now with the rain, we find that the new challenges are, particularly with the Forest Service and the roads, is getting access opened up again to the forest. They've worked hard to replace several bridges this last summer on their motorized trail systems, and half of the bridges that they replaced ended up getting washed out from the rainstorms that we've had in the near recent time. The other project I'd like to just throw out there, I think it's going to really improve the fishery on Colorado River at our state property, the Kemp Breeze property by partial. We're doing a restoration project or a fisheries improvement project, I guess, there. And basically, we're just narrowing and deepening the river and putting a lot of infrastructure for fisheries habitat for fish and the aquatic bug life. So that's going to be really exciting to see that completed here in the future. Construction just started, so there are some limited fishing impacts below the bridge at our Camp Breeze property. But we're excited to get that underway. For the short-term impacts, it's going to lead to some long-term benefits for the angling community and in the fishery.
Thanks, Jeremy. Appreciate that. So that's all 5 of our area wildlife managers. Kind of give you a brief update. Do we have any questions for any of the area wildlife managers? Online or on the floor? Perfect.
I'll ask one.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is directed particularly at Bill DeVerge, as I believe the impacts of this are primarily going to be in his area. Have there been any immediately tangible benefits to some of the horse roundup activities we've seen in those units this summer, or is it still too soon to tell?
Bill, did you hear the question?
No, I did not.
So Hogan was asking if there's been any benefits from the horse roundups that you might have noticed, or has it been too soon to see any sort of positive impact?
Definitely too soon. It's pretty obvious that there are a lot less horses, at least in that Piance East Douglas herd right now, where they did predominantly the removal area. I think we're anticipating to see the benefits, I guess you would say, to the habitat, especially with some of the rain we've been getting. Hopefully we'll still get some good regrowth before the end of the fall season. But yeah, a little too early right now to tell, other than if you go out and drive through the country, there are definitely a lot less horses visible at this time.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks for the question.
So it looks like Commissioner Haskins has a question, so I'm gonna unmute.
And you said it was Commissioner Haskett.
Yes.
Welcome, Commissioner Haskett. I think we have you unmuted, so if you have anything to say, please jump on.
Yeah, I had a question on the bear conflicts in the Roaring Fork Valley. Are they normal, above normal, below? What do they look like this year?
So Matt's going to come up and answer that question for you, Commissioner Haskett. I know Matt and I had a conversation earlier today about that very thing. I believe we're kind of average, but I'll let Matt answer that.
Hi, Commissioner Haskett. Thanks for the question. Yeah, Travis is correct. You know, I would say we're average for our number of conflicts that we're recording this year. Unfortunately, average tends to be in the hundreds of calls. So not something that we want to continue to own that title to. But as you very well know, you know, we're average. I think last I checked, we had somewhere around the high 300s, low 400 in the number of conflict calls that we've responded to.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Haskett, for the question.
Did Bob give his answer question?
So we're gonna try one more time to see if we can get Mr. Terwilliger unmuted. All right, Mr. Terwilliger, you are unmuted.
Bob, can you hear us? We cannot hear you. Is there any way we could have Bob call and hold the phone to the microphone?
We might have to. I believe Brad is on, and since we have the volume fixed, we can go ahead and get Brad going on his presentation. And I will work with Mr. Terwilliger over the phone.
Thank you, Rachel. Brad, can you hear us?
I sure can. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Brad. Go right ahead.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Brad Banulis. I'm the Northwest Senior Terrestrial Biologist. I was going to start off with a little bit of updates on some wolf stuff and then go into just some HMP and terrestrial updates. But I guess one of the things I was going to see, Rachel, I can't turn on my camera. I don't know if we want cameras on. But at one point, I'd like to just be able to show a map at some point. But following up on a question about related to wolf planning and wolf management. So over the last year and a half now, or a little over, we've been conducting a series of meetings. We've had some public meetings. We've also had the stakeholder advisory group meetings every month, and also a technical working group meetings every month. And we're kind of getting to the stage of wrapping that up. I believe our last, potentially at least our last stakeholder advisory group meeting is coming up here in, well, next week, I believe, in Glenwood Springs. The technical working group has been and the stakeholder advisory groups have been a great source for kind of being able to bring up different topics that the public had brought up in identification of issues related to wolf reintroduction, as well as from staff, and then also to be able to kind of collect experience from the technical working group and information on what they've experienced in other states through management, and then also to kind of also evaluate and vet those concerns through the stakeholder advisory group and try to get ideas on how to respond to different issues, and it's really ran the gamut on everything from where maybe even to where to release wolves to looking at managing game damage into the future. And so all of that stuff's kind of been being vetted over the last few years. And now we're to the stage of, I think we've got, like I said, we've got one more meeting. And then staff right now is actually drafting, is in the process of drafting the wolf reintroduction and management plan, with the idea and hope that we'll be presenting that to the Parks and Wildlife Commission in December. And then at that time, it'll be followed up in January, February with a series of meetings intended to collect public comment on the plan. And then both probably in-person opportunities as well as virtual meetings. And then with the idea that a final draft plan would be presented to the Parks and Wildlife Commission in April, and then a step 2 final approval of the wolf restoration management plan in May of 2023. That's kind of where we're at on our wolf planning process. And one of the questions that had been brought up is if there has been any kind of a financial analysis, and there hasn't, as far as kind of how wolves may impact different industries or communities, and part of that is just there's so many unknowns that it's just kind of essentially, I mean, while it would be interesting to have, it's kind of been beyond the scope, at least of the reintroduction and monitoring plan. But everybody recognizes that there are going to be some impacts, whether it's to direct impacts to livestock loss, or indirect to livestock, or maybe even into the future, the potential of impacts to license numbers based on population impacts or shifts in distribution or something like that. So there's a recognition of that there could be some impacts. There, as the plan's being developed and vetted, there is probably going to be, let's see, there we go. There is going to be the opportunity to kind of identify what financial resources the state will need to conduct the reintroduction and the monitoring and research of the wolves, and as reintroduction efforts take place. And we have, let's see, I had some numbers. To date, we had, let's see, last year we did get $1.1 million allocated to Colorado Parks and Wildlife from the general fund for the wolf planning process. This year, we've received about 2.1 million for the planning process, with up to $1 million of that to cover the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services NEPA work related to the 10J work and the NEPA work that's going into determining the feasibility of a 10J experimental non-essential criteria. We haven't done a lot of projections as to what potential impacts to the revenue will be into the future. But that is something that, you know, we'll be kind of looking at and at least trying to have a feel for as we move forward into the future. Alongside our state management planning process for the wolf restoration and management plan, like as I mentioned, there's a new federal process that's also being led by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, where CPW is a cooperator, but we're not leading that process. But and it is, there's in July 21st of 2022, there was a notice of intent to prepare the Colorado Gray Wolf 10J rulemaking environmental impact statement with public scoping beginning already. There has been, the Fish and Wildlife Service has hosted a series of public meetings, one in Gunnison, one in Silverthorne, one in Craig as well. And then they've also had a virtual public scoping meeting. So the public scoping on the federal process ends August 22nd. And I'll be honest, I don't know the full details of the federal NEPA process, but essentially the 10J is an experimental non-essential, which allows for the state to bring in wolves, yet still would allow for the management, whether even through lethal removal if there was conflict, without repercussions, at least as if it's, you know, deemed necessary. So like I said, the public scoping comment period for that ends August 22nd, and their plan is from the summer through the fall of 2022 to analyze those comments and prepare a scoping summary report. And then this fall, late fall, winter of 2022, 2023, they'll be gathering that data, refining alternatives and analyzing impacts and preparing that draft EIS. So that's really in the fall. So then January of 2023, their goal is to have a draft EIS and a proposed rule available for public review. That would allow then in February of 2023 for public meetings on the draft EIS to take place. And then with the idea being then the fall of 2023, a final EIS being released with a late fall of 2023 record of decision and a final rule published. And that is the process that would need to take place for the state to actually reintroduce wolves into Colorado. That's kind of a real brief, kind of high level updates of at least through the planning process of where we're at right now. I don't know if there's if anybody wants to add, Travis, if you want to add anything to that, or if we want to take any questions on that.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. I think you covered it pretty well, so I don't have much to add there, but I'm certain this is a topic that likely will generate some questions. So I guess we'll open it up for any sort of questions. I got a couple, I guess. So one question is, all of the information that's been gathered through these public processes by CPW, will that become part of the record with the EIS? In other words, will CPW be providing that to Fish and Wildlife Services part of the official record? Did you hear that, Brad?
He did. Really, I mean, most of that information that's been collected is even, well, at least through some product and report and summary is actually even available on the the wolf commenting website, which is where the notes can be found from from the technical working group and stakeholder advisory meetings. So the summaries of those are available there. Summary reports that Keystone has done, summarizing, the early initial public input that was collected. That's available on there, as well as some more recent reports, kind of summarizing again just a lot of the discussions that have taken place, even as recently related to kind of more into the details of management and different processes related to the potential for preemptive management of livestock and protection of livestock, to also reactive management. So there's some tables that have kind of been developed to kind of line out that process through different steps and different categories. Though that's the summary reports are available on that website now. So I would assume then at that, based on that information would be available to Fish and Wildlife Service.
I got question number 2. Where do we stand on game damage? Who's going to end up paying for game damage? How's that going to be funded? That's related to what? Got a good answer for that one,
No, that's still in development. What we know from the some of the early discussions is trying to get funding, an alternative funding source for potentially for funding the game damage piece. So that has not been identified where that funding source is going to come from. It's our understanding that it's not supposed to come from game cash.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, Dean. The language is fairly clear that it's not supposed to come from game cash. I think that, and Brad can correct me if I'm wrong, that initial 1.1 million, some of that was used to handle some damage claims, if you will. Thank you.
This is Bob Twilliger. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Bob. Can you hear us?
Oh, yeah, I can. All right. So I have a question for Brad. So I know I've been following this very closely, and I've read the reports. And it sounds like one of the actions that needs to be done over the long haul is to do a complete financial analysis, not only of what wolves are going to cost us, but also some estimates about the financial impacts to the state of Colorado, both from small town businesses, outfitters, decline in potentially big game licenses being sold because we're going to need to kill less elk potentially, and just taking a total look at that financial picture. I was just curious to confirm that that's actually true, because quite honestly, I think it's more important than ever, given the state of affairs in our country and in Colorado after going through COVID. Now we've seen record inflation with the high fuel prices. A lot of these people that are going to be infected, like ranchers and small businesses who are already hurting financially, this really, I think, needs to be looked at very carefully about how it's managed financially, including that it could cost the taxpayers of Colorado more money.
Was there a question in there, Bob?
Yeah, there's a question really. What level of financial analysis is going to be done? Are they going to take a total view like you would on any business proposal where we do a total business case to understand all the costs and the financial impacts?
Yeah, Bob, appreciate the question. I mean, at least till now, and just been following up with Eric Odell, our species conservation coordinator, who's kind of been leading this, and Reed DeWalt, our assistant director, who's been involved. That kind of analysis has not been done yet. I mean, as far as kind of a complete analysis of what those impacts will be. Really, the discussion, at least so far, has kind of been more of how, it's been more related to what is it going to cost for the state to kind of complete the reintroduction, and looking into the future. And even at that, I mean, kind of at a high level, at least to this point.
Okay. But it sounds like they're going to take more of a look at it, which is great. One other quick question I had for you, Brad, as I follow it, and maybe I've just missed it. Actually, this is my 14th year working in the outdoor or in the outfitting business. I currently guide for Budge's Lodge and the South Flat Tops. And one of the things that I've really been interested in is, what's being discussed as it relates to wolves as it affects outfitters? You know, we run pack trips in the wilderness. We've got stock. We've got clients. Are we going to be allowed to protect our stock? Has there been any discussions around that yet?
I'm trying to remember, and Garrett and Travis may have a better feel for that than I do on kind of protection of stock and related to that. I mean, yeah, I don't know if you guys have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, Bob, this is all part of that discussion related to the take. And so obviously it's going to be a very contentious topic when it comes to that. So they are the stakeholder advisory group and everybody in this plan are going to be looking at, are we going to be able to have take, you know, in the plan, you know, but again, a lot of this is going to be stemmed from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the 10J ruling for that. So it's being discussed. And again, we're trying to make sure we have every tool in the toolbox for managing wolves. But again, that's something that's going to be vetted through this process of with the stakeholder advisory and this plan that's going to be drafted for public comment.
Yeah, and
Okay.
and yeah, and like Garrett said, I mean, without that 10J rule in place, I mean, then all authority falls under the Fish and Wildlife Service and federal authority. So really, that wouldn't allow for any take unless that 10J was passed. And then at that, there has been, and maybe you've seen some of those, some of that discussion too at the last Parks and Wildlife Commission meeting. Bob, Eric Odell did present even some tables kind of illustrating, like, based on different population thresholds, what, maybe different, when different actions could possibly take place. You know, I mean, when during initial reintroduction at low level populations, not allowing for possibly not allowing for removal of wolves. And then when we hit a certain threshold, then that kind of triggers the, to be able to allow for, potentially allow for lethal removal at different stages. So that is, like Garrett said, that is being discussed.
Okay. Yeah, I've just seen a lot on ranching and how they will protect ranchers, on their own lands. But to me, it feels like there's got to be a lot more thought into how it's managed within the wilderness, both for outfitters. We've got stock out there, and, reimbursing for stock is kind of a slippery slope, because it's not only the cost of a mule or a horse, but it's all the work that goes into it so that they're safe, reliable, and everything else. That takes years to build that kind of stock. And so I think that's going to be a key topic with outfitters, as well as for ranchers that run, sheep and cattle in the wilderness. That's going to be a tough one too. But
I can tell you, Bob, this is a big discussion, and it's one probably that gets talked about a lot, even at the stakeholder advisory group. So this stuff is being discussed in really, really big length.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and Bob, to answer your question on other kind of analysis we're doing, Brad, probably just as brief as you can be, we are doing some baseline research related to how it might affect some, elk populations, et cetera. Brad, do you have a brief kind of summary of what we're looking at research-wise?
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, so we've got kind of two things that we'll be looking at. I mean, one aspect is actually we've got our mammals research section. We have a new researcher, Ellen Brandell, who's going to be kind of leading some research looking at wolves and wolf impacts related to ungulates and prey, and looking at up in North Park with the existing pack, and with moose up there. We're also going to be starting up a project. We'll be collaring some elk up there in North Park as well, to get an idea of how, just that current pack up there may be affecting distribution up there as well. And then one of the things that we've taken on as an agency as well is monitoring. It's something we've been interested for a while. This has kind of been this has been the impetus to kind of kick it in gear too, has been just monitoring elk survival rates. We've got 5 mule deer monitoring areas around the state that we've had going since the late 90s, actually. And now we're going to be kicking up and starting up 3 additional elk monitoring areas. In addition to Nathaniel Rail, one of our elk researchers, has got a project looking at calf recruitment And we've got 3 study areas with that project already, but we're going to be adding in these other 3 monitoring areas, with one going into the Middle Park area in the Northwest region, one going into Gunnison Basin, and then one going into South Park as well. And they kind of overlap, just in, kind of representative elk populations and habitat types in the central part of the state. And we actually are going to, we've got collars on order now, and this winter we'll be actually deploying collars on elk calves and cows to start looking at and monitoring survival rates to incorporate into our population models. And then it'll also give us some good information on migration and movement patterns and distribution into the future.
Thanks, Brad. Appreciate that. I think unless we have other questions out there, in the interest of time, we probably should move on. Any other questions before we do that?
We do not have any other questions through YouTube.
Got one in the back. Sorry, Rachel.
So the whole situation surrounding wolves is typically not a popular subject, depending on where you're at. But I have some questions. I guess my question is there concern with bringing outside wolves while we have current wolves taking residents up?
So if I understood your question correctly, a concern about bringing wolves in from elsewhere.
Correct.
While we have a one
Resident
pack right
population.
now.
Yeah, is there concern with conflict between that? Taking the time to spend all this money and research feasibility statements. I haven't heard much on whether or not how that's going to impact the current pack, or if the current pack could potentially impact what's brought in.
Well, I'm certainly not the expert. I'll let Brad and Garrett kind of chime in if they need to, but I don't think we've necessarily looked at that initially. That pack up in North Park came in on their own volition, if you will. And through this planning process, we're not even certain where we're putting wolves yet, right?
Yes, sir.
Now, wolves are wolves. They're going to go where they're going to go, right? So certainly there could be some, interaction with the wolves that are introduced and those that are here on the ground. What those impacts are would be a wild guess on my part, but I'll let Garrett or Brad chime in as well.
Yeah, we sought out, obviously, from some of our northern Rocky states, some of that exact information about like wolf behavior and stuff and what they saw. And answer your question is no, we're not really concerned about it, because wolves will do what they do, and so they will naturally disperse themselves where they're at. Obviously, they're territorial, and and packs will establish where they're going to establish. But as far as it having an impact on the current pack, we're not really concerned with that. They end up taking care of themselves.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, I mean, and part of it is just with Proposition 114. I mean, we are tasked with reintroducing a viable population into Colorado as well. So I mean, with having the one pack up there, that's one pack. But then we kind of also have to look at bringing in wolves for establishing across the state and really and technically actually. North Park is actually on the east side of the divide, and 114 is just out of a technicality, but I mean 114 directs us to reintroduce onto a viable population of the west slope of Colorado.
Great question, though. Thanks for asking. All right, last call for question on wolves before we move on. Anything online? All right, let's move on. Brad, do you want to move right into the Northwest region terrestrial updates?
Yeah, I sure can. And that was kind of a good segue too. I mean, with talking about the elk monitoring areas, that was going to be one of the updates I wanted to let folks know about. A couple other things too that we have going. We have, following the passing of the West Slope Lion Management Plan, 2 years ago, we initiated a project up in Middle Park to monitor lion density, and that was an agreement out of the plan that we would do that in one population in Northwest Colorado and one in Southwest. 2 years ago, we started up in Middle Park. We collared 25 cats, and then last winter, we actually collected our first density estimates, and by doing so, we added collars back in that to get our sample size back up to that about 20 to 25 range, based on harvest and mortality and just cats leaving the area. And then at the same time, we put out a camera grid. We established a camera grid to get at to use cameras to get at density estimates. We've kind of got some of the analysis going right now, actually, and looking at just some of the preliminary results. It looks like it's worked really well, and some of our estimates are coming in kind of at least preliminary, looking like they're coming in right at some of the estimates that we're using to establish our line quotas and density mapping that we did for the line management plan. So hopefully we're trying to figure out how we're going to get that stuff out to the public too, but we will be sharing that information. I mean, that project isn't necessarily a long-term research project. I mean, it's a long-term monitoring project. So we do want to share some of that, get that information out to the public, and it's what information that we'll be using annually to set quotas into the future. So a couple other things that we've got going. We're also in the process of kind of with Terrestrial and with the area staff, but also out of our mammals research section, we've got a new researcher who's going to be looking at some bobcat research and trying to get at density estimates. So we're kind of in the real early stages right now, but of establishing study design and study areas to try to start looking at getting some better and more recent information on bobcat densities in Colorado. Another aspect too right now, our biologists and area staff are working across the state to collect information on pronghorn. We've been conducting fixed wing flights and ground surveys to get at fawn doe ratios and buck doe ratios and estimates, and looking at reproductive success for our pronghorn populations around the state. We're also we've been trying to we do summer surveys via helicopter for bighorn sheep and mountain goat. The last 2 years we've probably between COVID and just expenses and everything else, we haven't been able to get helicopters up in the air. We've actually been able to get a helicopter up in the air this year. So we started down in the southwest part of the state doing sheep and goat surveys. They're in the southeast part of the state right now. And by the end of the week, we'll be doing a couple of surveys up in the northwest part of the state and northeast, looking at so we can try to get some information on young female ratios and male ratios, as well as just kind of looking at overall productivity and distribution of bighorns and mountain goats. So excited to finally be kind of getting some data again that way. And then the other thing that I really kind of just wanted to mention as well is, and some folks have probably seen it, but we're in the process, every year we're kind of around the state, we're trying to update some of our herd management plans. We're behind statewide. We're way behind on a lot of our herd management plans. I mean, we try to keep the ideas that these plans would be, would establish our population objectives and our sex ratio objectives, which, population obviously, I mean, is a threshold that we're going to try to manage for. The sex ratio objectives also kind of dictate, what we're going to be managing for hunting opportunity. If it's if we're managing for deer and we're managing for really high buck doe ratios, it's going to be limited opportunity, but quality animals. And not, so not a lot of opportunity for hunting very frequently, but, high quality animals. Or we manage for really low buck doe ratios and we can have lots of opportunity. Somebody could draw a license almost every year and, but the quality is going to be lower generally. Even in some of our populations where we manage for really low buck doe ratios, you can still on occasion find that really old buck and big buck, but just the opportunity is a lot lower. So we're doing this around the state, and we're kind of tackling it in a different manner. We're trying to get everything up to date and a little quicker. In the Northwest region, we're actually trying to update all of our deer management plans for the region. We've got 16 mule deer herds in Northwest Colorado. I think, let's see, 7 of our plans right now are 2 years old or less that we've gotten updated, but 9 of them have still been needed updated. So that's what we're kind of in the process right now, is trying to get all of the rest of those deer management plans up to date. So then the idea will be, we've had some public meetings already this year, this summer, and with the idea being this fall, we'll actually be going out to the public with a draft plan for a comment period to try to collect additional input on proposed population objectives for mule deer across Northwest Colorado. Primarily in those plans that aren't up to date, and also looking at those sex ratios, and and really identifying the different management issues that are affecting those populations, whether it's CWD or habitat. I mean, obviously the drought has affected our populations across really a lot of Northwest Colorado. Some populations are more resilient across the landscape than others, but it's that's a concern. It could be recreation, or in some places, or oil and gas development, or there's a variety of housing developments. I mean, there's a variety of factors that affect different populations. So we're just trying to identify those and develop those management plans moving forward. And then with the hope that we'll be taking then this proposed plan with sex ratio objectives and population objectives to the Parks and Wildlife Commission this winter for approval, and get all of our deer plans up to date in Northwest Colorado. And the other regions are tackling different species. In Southwest Colorado, they're updating all of their elk plans, and across the Eastern Plains, the Northeast and Southeast regions are updating pronghorn. We're going through this process to get through our deer management plans this year, and then next year we'll be tackling elk plans as well. So I just kind of wanted to give an update, let people know that this is going on, and kind of be on the lookout for providing input when those opportunities arise, and when we're looking for input on our deer management going into this late summer and fall and winter. So those are just some quick updates from Terrestrial, if there's any other questions.
Thanks, Brad. Appreciate it. Any other questions for Brad?
We do not have any questions online.
Perfect, thank you. Brad, thank you. We'll move on. Let's go to Jonathan. If you're ready, we'll get you up here. Jonathan Boydson, our public involvement specialist, here this evening to talk to us about the license allocation work group and that process.
Yeah, thanks. Do you mind if I stand?
I don't mind. I'm gonna swap microphones so you're on a different microphone. So
You're ready for me. 1, 2, 3. I might stray from video, but I might come on it at the same time every once in a while. But I like to be a little bit interactive. So if it's okay with everybody, yeah, actually that's perfect. Thank you. I'll try to stick over in this area. If it's okay with everybody, I'll go ahead and stand up. I know I'm on the agenda as sort of the presenter tonight. It's great to come to these meetings to not just meet the public, but also sort of listen to the other presentations from CPW staff. I can tell you, I'm not as interesting to listen to as a lot of the CPW staff, especially in this region, who are doing really cool stuff out there in the field. I'm Jonathan. I'm based in Denver. I'm out here this evening to talk about our license distribution, license allocation, work group process, sort of what we've been up to. But I also want to take time to listen to all of you. And for those listening online, please feel free to leave questions in the chat as well. On YouTube, Bob, if you're listening to us, feel free to chime in with any thoughts that you have as I get going here. So I want to briefly talk a little bit about license distribution, again, kind of what we've been up to, and hear your thoughts on that. But again, let me just tell you a little bit about what I do. I'm a public involvement planning specialist, again, based out of Denver. My name is Jonathan Boydson. And I get to work with the public and stakeholders across the state, as well as with non-residents, on a whole host of issues concerning sports people, outdoor recreationists, visitors to our state parks, and so on. And of course, one of the big things we do as an agency is regulate and manage big game hunting. And I'm glad that Brad actually went before me because it kind of was a good segue. You kind of heard a little bit about our herd management planning, managing to objectives that eventually goes into setting quotas, license numbers, if you will, for our big game herds. Part of that, though, beyond, of course, managing big game herds, when we're talking about big game hunting, is how we give out the licenses. So when I talk about license distribution this evening, I'm kind of just talking about the many different systems that we have in place to give out licenses. And that'll make a little bit more sense here in a minute. But I want to kind of look back for a second. Like I said, I wanted to give a bit of a background because I think some of you might be interested to know about it. And I think we owe the public a little bit of a background on sort of how we've come to where we are now with the review of our license distribution systems. Looking back not too long ago, but our current big game season structure that we're in, I think it's 2020 to 2024. When we were working on that big game season structure plan, we were trying to decide exactly the scope of our planning for big game season structure. And we decided to focus on the seasons themselves, the dates, the lengths, and so on. And as well as everything that kind of goes into setting seasons. And if you look at the big game season structure plan, you know that there's quite a bit there. But one of the things that we chose not to focus on, at least not to spend a massive amount of resources focusing on at that point, was things like allocation, preference points, and other ways in which we give out licenses. We were kind of thinking about the seasons themselves, managing for herd health and so on. But we decided at that point that we might need to take more time and a kind of a different process to analyze how we give out the licenses. We thought that that was a little bit separate. And so we went to the commission and discussed that with them at the time, looking back, and it was decided to look into our license distribution systems in greater depth after that big game season structure process, and sort of with now when we're in that big game season structure, if you will. And hopefully to try to, what we want to do is try to figure out what the issues are for sports people that we serve as far as license distribution in this case. And then also what solutions are out there and what might we want to implement, hopefully in time for before we get around to planning our next big game season structure. And that's kind of why we're talking to you now, and why it wasn't maybe talked about during the last big game season structure planning process. But again, I've kind of listed a couple things about a couple examples of license distribution, allocation, and preference points I've brought up already. But that's actually a good place to kind of start. The issue of how we give out licenses is complex, and I know you all kind of know that, but it's multi-layered. There's lots of things going on. And some people have told us, of course, that we should really be looking at how we allocate licenses between residents and non-residents. Some people will talk to us about preference point creep and how they've seen a inflation, if you will, and how many preference points are needed to get a license for certain units. Other people will then, if we're talking about limited licenses, we'll then talk about over-the-counter unlimited seasons, right? So all of these different examples of license distribution then kind of come out of the woodwork, excuse me, really. And there's also some other examples you can get into as well. But we wanted to sort of think about the scope of our license distribution review. And those few things that I just mentioned are kind of what we've been reviewing as of late, right? So license allocation, preference points, and then over-the-counter licenses. And when I say reviewing those things, those topics, if you will, what I really mean is we've been talking to the public about what you all think we could be doing better or what's going right with those systems. And actually, we've also taken time to talk to staff as well to see what they think about these systems as well. Okay, so and on that note, I want to talk just really briefly about kind of the steps we've taken up until this point after that big game season structure planning process, when we said that we were gonna take up a review of license distribution, we started in earnest looking at those few different topics and first asking both the public and staff what they felt was important for us to look into, to review, to figure out if there's anything we could be doing better. And we did very much hear about those few kind of topic areas, differences though between people. So some people certainly were looking more at allocation, more at preference points for some people. Some people are really focused on our over-the-counter licenses. But those are the kind of topic areas that kind of came out of that original scoping. And that scoping, if you will, was we really talked to quite a few residents and non-residents, as well as staff. We sent out, actually there was a staff comment form as well, but there was a public comment form. And really quickly, I want to mention, we got, I think it was over 12,000 responses to that comment form, survey, if you will, comment form, just a voluntary survey. Over 12,000 responses to that survey. That's way more we ever got for any of our wolf reintroduction plan, just so you know. So we understand that license distribution is really important to people. That was heard loud and clear. But now after that, we've kind of gone beyond just thinking about, okay, what are the topic areas, right? And thinking about what are the problems, which might sound like a basic question, but we'll talk about it today. And then also, what are some of the strategies we could use to fix those problems, right? And so I want to dive into that a little bit today and hear what you all think. If you're okay with sharing, again, this is my job is to kind of get public input and not so much to talk. I'd prefer not to talk as much as you all share your opinions. So thinking about those topic areas now, if we can, and I'll just kind of, for the sake of time, I would usually love to have a super long discussion and let you kind of tell me what you want to start the conversation with. But for the sake of time, let's talk a little bit about allocation. And then, as we can, I'll kind of get into preference points and OTC licenses if I can, as time permits, okay? But thinking about allocation a little bit. And again, non-resident and resident allocation. And I have a pretty basic question. And if you entertain me, I'd love to hear your kind of reflections on this. What do you see as the problem, if anything, with how we allocate licenses between residents and non-residents? And for folks on YouTube, feel free to, is it okay if they add to the chat? Absolutely. Thanks. Any volunteers, anybody, or do you not have any issues? Is there no problem at all? And I know we have a handful of members of the public here tonight, so not to call out anybody, but I'd love a volunteer for that. Is there an issue with how we allocate between residents and non-residents? Yeah.
Well, to start out with, because I can't help myself, I would suggest that the pricing structure for non-residents essentially creates a perverse incentive to allocate those licenses independent of their impact on the quality or resident opportunity. No secret, obviously, it's an enterprise agency. License revenues are the primary funding source for the agency. But I guess it's more of a statement than a question. I would urge us to be conscious of that.
Yeah, so getting into pricing, so I will say that non-residents pay significantly more than residents, right? So but sort of I'm digging into it a little bit.
I guess I'll re-summarize that.
Yeah, so what do you think is the sort of the problem with, and what could we be doing? What could we change?
Right. Because such a significant portion of our revenue is dependent on state licenses, there's significant pressure for the agency to allocate a high percentage of those relative to other game management agencies. In-state residents are naturally going to be critical of that high ratio. I guess I would assure that pricing is a fundamental component of this question.
Sure, and I'll ask a follow-up about pricing here in a second, but just to kind of pull that, you said ratio. So it's like the percentage, right? It's how many licenses we give to non-residents versus residents.
Yeah.
To you think that the percentage, if you will, going to non-residents is too high because that's where we get a lot of funding.
I'll stop short of issuing an opinion. On the ratio.
You can issue opinions. I'm here for opinions.
No, I'd like tonight to comment on whether the ratio is too high or too low, only that we need to be careful that whatever ratio we conclude is correct, we're not doing purely as a funding.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I love the connection to, yeah, funding for sure. Other opinions in the room or from online?
Nothing online, but for those kind of speaking in the back of the room, if you can talk a little bit louder, just because our microphone is up there on the desk, but nothing online.
Okay, sounds good. So does anybody want to take the stance, and feel free online to say yes, and that is, you could just say that. And what's your name? I'm sorry.
My name is Hogan.
Hogan. So Hogan said, you know, we have to be thinking about the funding and how the funding goes into allocation and all of that. And I want to ask maybe some follow-up questions to that. But Hogan didn't take me up on telling me that the percentage going to non-residents is too high. Does anybody think that the percentage of licenses going to non-residents is too high?
From most of the murmurings I've heard in my community, yes.
Yeah, okay. And thank you. I mean, it might not be you, it might be your friends or your family who thinks that. Yeah, please.
You think it's too high because it precludes residents from getting those licenses?
A lot of murmuring, yes, a lot of murmuring I've heard is, you know, a lot of residents feel like they're missing out on opportunity due to higher allocation on the state.
Yeah, so the comment, just for those online, was that residents might feel like they're missing out on opportunity because of the percentage going to people from out of state. Okay, so it's like your problem in that case is that so residents don't have the opportunity to get the licenses to be able to go on, right? Is that or what you're hearing? Yeah, what you're hearing. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
We did also have someone on YouTube comment, yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. That's yes. So and I want to hear that, just because we sort of want to take a step back to think about, if we're going to make a change to license allocation, what problem are we addressing, right? What are we going to get at if we are going to make a change to license allocation? And so one of the, I guess I should stop there and quickly say, what does allocation currently look like? And feel free for those who might know a little bit more about this, feel free to jump in. Right now in the state, for limited licenses, and again, putting aside over-the-counter licenses, there's two different splits, if you will, between non-residents and residents for big game licenses, or at least for, I guess I'm thinking of elk and deer for sure. But anyway, at least for elk and deer, there's two major splits: 65-35 and 80-20, right? So some of you might have heard that before. So for most of our licenses and units, 65% of those licenses go to residents and 35% go to non-residents. For high demand units, and those are the units that took more than 6 preference points in a certain year that we use in regulation to calculate those, if they go above that 6 preference points, it's 80% resident, 20% non-resident. Okay, so right now we have two different allocation splits. And so if to kind of go back to what people were saying before, if the problem is that the non-resident percentage is too high, then the solution that they would be proposing would be to, make residents get a higher percentage. So maybe, let's say 65-35, we don't want that anymore. We want residents to get more than 65% of licenses. At least that's what some people would say. Okay, so with that in mind, does anybody in the room or online have ideas? And I'm jumping around quickly here. I'm going from problem to solutions really quickly, but bear with me. Does anybody have any proposed solutions that you're really dying to share for what percentage splits you think, or one split you think would be better for allocation? Any ideas? And you can just throw out numbers online as well. Bob, I know you're there as well. You can throw out numbers as well if you'd like.
Jonathan, while they're thinking about that, it might be important to point out that those caps on non-resident are a soft cap.
Yes.
And that allocation applies only to a first choice application.
Right. Yeah, good point. So and that's why we get sometimes questions if you do your own math about how many licenses went to, for example, non-residents for a certain unit. Any suggestions?
We do have.
Okay.
Here says make it 90-10 wildlife in the state of Colorado belongs to Colorado residents.
Okay. So 90-10. So 90% residents, 10% non-resident. And that was Peter.
Yes.
Peter, feel free to chime in if you have any reasons for that 90%, 10% split. I've heard that idea before, and but I want to hear if you have any thoughts on that.
There might be a little bit of a lag.
Yeah, for sure. Well, in the meantime, so I guess I'll because of that lag and because of our time, I'll go ahead and maybe give an answer. If that's okay. So we hear a little bit about 90%, 10% because of other states around us, right? So a lot of what we've been hearing about in Colorado is sort of from hunters here who might go elsewhere to be a non-resident hunter. Some of you might be in this situation, and then kind of get a less favorable non-resident percentage where they go out of state than what we give to non-residents here in Colorado, basically. Is there some agreement that people go out of state in this room for hunting, and there might be some agreement? Okay, so that's one thing that we've kind of been hearing about. Any other comments before I forget?
He said it sounds like 90% priority to Colorado residents, and then that 10 to out of state.
Okay, yeah, for sure. Okay, so that's one suggestion. Feel free to throw out more suggestions, folks online and folks in the room as we go along. But that's one thing that we need to think about, is not just sort of what the problem is. And in this case, if it's too high of a non-resident ratio percentage, we also got to think about what could we maybe change it to, and what does that correct number look like, to the point, get to resident opportunity, and also back to funding for a second as well. We do have to consider financial impacts and making sure that we are able to fund wildlife management in the state. Yeah, question.
Have any of your surveys demonstrated whether residents are going to be willing to pay more as a result of non-residents being precluded from trying?
I love that you brought it up, because I'm going to ask you that question. Would you pay more?
Yeah.
So for folks in the room and folks online, I'm not here on a secret mission to try to get you to say that you would pay more. But considering we do have financial, we have to analyze sort of the impacts on our finances, as well as frankly on sort of the impacts on, this is a little bit separate than maybe adjusting the fees, but we also have to think about the financial impacts if, for example, communities, maybe in Northwest Colorado, have non-residents that are visiting those communities. So anyway, there's a lot of different things that kind of goes into the financial analysis. Other thoughts though from folks online or folks in the room, would you pay more? And you feel free to let me know how much more for your resident licenses if there were fewer. Well, let me say that differently. If there were more resident opportunity, if you had more tags going to you residents, would you pay more?
I would second this gentleman's comment. I would pay more, and if it was proportionate to quality, I would pay a lot more.
Okay, all right. Well, that's a good point too. So quality. So can I ask about that last part too? Because I know looking at other states like license fees and everything, there might be some different fee structures or whatever. Are you saying that for like specific hunts you might pay more if that's a quality hunt?
No, I would have stated it as an.
Okay, so you're not talking about different pricing for quality for like a unit over here is like known for. Okay, yeah, right. Okay, all right. Just thank you. I wanted to make sure I clarified that. Okay, sounds good. So that's a little bit about what we're thinking about for allocation, right? What we might change the split, if you will, the percentages, what we might change that to, and then also financial impacts and how to factor that into sort of decisions. Anything online before I move on?
Yes, yours said yes. for example, up to $100 for elk tags.
Okay,
Then Kendall also said, I think I would be willing to pay more if I had more chance of getting a tag.
yeah, okay, right. And again, so back to the, what I would call opportunity, opportunity to draw a tag. If you felt like you had more opportunity, you might be willing to pay a little bit more. Going on to, well, let me stop briefly, actually, before I was going to talk a little bit about preference points, and I want to think about preference points a little bit as well. But I think that we've been talking about allocation, and that's a primary draw thing, right? That's the licenses that are coming out of the primary draw. For unlimited over-the-counter licenses for elk, right? We've also heard feedback, and I'm kind of jumping through this a little bit, so I'm going to cut ahead to the feedback that we've heard, and then feel free to let me know what you think about maybe some strategies. What we've heard is that some folks have, I'll be careful with this because it depends on who you ask what the exact problem is, right? But for over-the-counter licenses that are unlimited, we do hear about crowding and non-resident versus sort of resident, not versus, I shouldn't say that, but residents will bring up seeing several non-residents during unlimited over-the-counter seasons, right? Is that a concern? Let me stop there. Do you think not just non-residents, but for a second, for those of you who might go on an OTC over-the-counter hunt, do you see crowding as a concern, or are you happy with your OTC experience? Any thoughts up in the room or online before I move on?
I'm good. This is Bob
You like
Terwilliger.
it?
I'm going to say that
Okay, yeah.
This is Bob. It was an eastern state, a lot of whitetail hunting, small public land access, so I got to see the Orange Army in full force there versus, running into 6-7 guys here isn't much of a comparison.
Okay, so a comment in the room that over the counter is a good experience still, and all things considered. Other comments? Does anybody want to second some of the concern we might have heard about crowding in OTC seasons?
Not so much crowding, but as some over-the-counter units are potentially going to be closed into, not closed, but turned into potential limited access units or limited draw units. Is there any discussion of potential over-the-counter cap versus making it a limited entry?
Yeah, so that's a good comment. So that is one of the strategies and remember, I'm thinking about sort of what we've heard from the public. That's one thing that the public has brought up. But I will say, and I wanna say this because I want to compare these two things. There's capping over the counter. There's capping over the counter for non-residents and leaving it, whatever residents can get a license. Or there's turning over the counter licenses into limited licenses. Now that would be so that it's not you don't go into the office and just get an OTC license. You got to go through a draw, right? But it's one way. If you were concerned about OTC seasons, that's one way to handle kind of OTC seasons. And so, yeah, that's kind of what people have thrown around. But to tell you the truth, I've heard a lot of different opinions on that. I'm not sure there's a consensus even among those who want to see a change between those things. Do you have any comments about capping?
I do not. I like the over-the-counter. To just hunt when I can. I just moved down here, so my preference point build is minimal, if none. So, just having the opportunity to be able to go hunt on the available days that I have is opportunity.
Yeah, great. So the comment again was the opportunity to go and get an over-the-counter license is great, and capping is maybe not the strategy for this gentleman that he would like to pursue. So,
Sorry,
yep.
real quick to interrupt. I'm gonna, Mr. Terwilliger is his hand raised.
Yeah, great.
All right, Mr. Terwilliger. Okay, Mr. Terwilliger, you should be able to talk now.
Okay, thank you. I would like to say that in the units I've been hunting in, and I'll say that I've been guiding now for the last 14 years, predominantly in the Flat Tops Wilderness areas, specifically 25, 26, as well as unit 214 and 14 in the Zircle. I've guided there for 5 years. I'm going to tell you that those areas, particularly during the archery season and second rifle season, are getting pounded. The overcrowding is definitely an issue. I'm not suggesting that they're killing more elk. I think probably what's happened in many cases is the number of hunters are pushing the elk into areas where they either can't get at physically, it's very tough to access them, or quite frankly, they're just going down on private land. And I know that to be the case along the Elk River Road, you know, when you talk about unit 14 and 214. And the Flat Tops Wilderness, I think you have some of the same. Those bulls and, you know, those elk are getting pushed out or getting pushed really up high. And it is affecting the quality of the experience, in my opinion.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that comment, Bob. So again, just to repeat, just to kind of put in on that problem, you know, crowding and the effects on the pressure, and if you will, not just crowding, but sort of the pressure on the animals and the effect that has on the quality of the experience. So Bob, we talked a little bit about strategies and you know, what one thing is just, you know, and it was brought up as sort of status quo, if you will, just that OTC is still a good all-around experience and something that our residents and non-residents appreciate. Would you advocate for a change, something like capping or eliminating OTC licenses, or at least for some areas, and moving them into limited licenses? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, you know, I think that you could accomplish the goal either way. You could put a cap on them if you want, so they're still as over the counter, and when they're gone, they're gone. That certainly would be an option, because that's going to address the pressure. Or, you know, in some cases, you might go to a limited license. I understand that potentially could drive more overhead, more cost for CPW, so I'm sensitive to that, particularly in these times. But putting a cap on it would definitely be an option, and it would improve the experience. And you know, quite frankly, what might happen is there's areas, and I don't know, this is just speaking and thinking out loud. There could be areas that are in fact underhunted, that maybe then those hunters that missed out on an OTC tag in one area could go to another area and still have a good experience, and maybe even a better experience, you know, once they learn the country.
So was that comment about capping? So you would be capping OTC by area, if you does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that could definitely be an option.
Okay. Yeah.
And I have one more real quick.
Yeah, sure.
From one of our area wildlife managers.
Good. Cool.
Yep, it should. Braxton can see me. I'm hitting ask to unmute. Chris, if it lets you unmute, there we go. Go ahead, Chris.
No, I just want to make sure that Bob gets an answer to some of the questions he had about pressure, unit 14 and 214, and the steps that the Northwest region area 10, along with Terrestrial, has taken to reduce some of the conflict, along with what we've seen in reduction in cow-calf ratios and the overall health of that population. And so we've taken some pretty big steps of removing a List B cow tag for archery, along with drastic reductions in the rifle seasons, along with muzzleloader. And, you know, it's on the list of possible places to limit over the counter for archery and down the road, but there's a bigger statewide strategy on how to address those issues. But Bob, I want to make sure that if there are any concerns up there specific to those units, you can reach out to me anytime, and I'd be happy to give you the specifics along with anybody else in our public.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. And I'm real good friends with and actually worked for him for the last 5 years for Russ Lambert, that runs Colorado Outfitters, and those are the two primary areas that he operates, as well as down in Summit. But you know, so that's where some of that feedback that Russ and I have discussed is quite a bit too.
Great. So just to summarize OTC for a quick second, you know, just consider sort of as we're moving forward with reviewing, in this case, OTC licenses, what we have to think about are, we heard a couple opinions from this group tonight about, you know, about different views on OTC licenses. And I think that a lot of people, many people can agree that having OTC licenses available is provides a great opportunity for hunters, right, to be able to get a license. But we also want to make sure that we're thinking about the impacts on the grounds and how to manage pressure and crowding and making sure that people have a quality hunting experience. And of course, going back to herd health, that we're managing our herds as well. Moving on really quickly, and we don't have too much time for this. I'm going to do this really quickly, which is a scary prospect, but I want to talk about preference points real quick, okay? And I know there's quite a bit there, but I want to think about a little bit, and this is something that we hear about preference point creep a bit, right? And the necessity to use more points on licenses as years go by, so it becomes difficult maybe to draw a tag if you've been looking at that tag. But we also have heard from people. I was at a similar meeting in the Northeast region, and there was debate in that room about whether or not preference point is a major concern. And so I want to think about preference points, and before we get into strategies, and we might have to leave strategies for your comments to the commission, by the way, just because of time, but I want to take a little bit of time to think about and hear from you all. Do you think there's an issue with our preference point system, or do you think it's working how it should be? Does anybody have any comments on that? It's a big question, and it might depend on how it's working for you too. So yeah,
I shoot and say yes, there's a problem with the preference point system. And the reason I say that is the average kid who is old enough to hunt today that starts applying for a preferred unit may not live long enough to draw that license. And I don't know what the fix is, but that seems like a huge problem to me. It somehow needs to be dealt with, addressed, given some attention.
Yeah, okay, so the comment was her preference point creep is an issue, and my wording, that creep is an issue. And especially if you think about kids maybe not being able to draw a tag further down the road sometime in their life, that's a concern. Anybody think that preference points are working the way they should?
So we actually have,
Oh, yeah.
Yep, so we have a comment on YouTube. Kendall says, I have 2 preference points for antelopes and still haven't drawn a buck tag where I go around meeting hunters from other states that draw with 0 to 1 preference point.
Right, and so this is something that we hear, right, is that people look at people, they, hunters talk to each other and see that there are just maybe discrepancies in what tags are drawn out at point levels. There's complexity to the system, I will say, and I'm not a complete expert on it. So if I admit I might not have all of the answers to exactly why that happened, but I do know that that's something that we hear, right, is that people look and see, oh, I have this many points, I should be getting this tag, but I'm not. Okay. Anybody, so I hear that loud and clear. Anybody think before I move on that there's no issue and that preference points are working the way that they should? I just want to make sure. No, going once, twice. Oh.
Well, in actuality, preference point system is working the way it's supposed to design.
Okay.
I mean, it allows for predictability. To a certain degree, you can anticipate when you might be able to draw. But because of that predictability, you forfeit maybe your opportunity to ever draw because of the preference point creep. And then we continue piling on other things that add to the creep as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, sometimes we're our own worst enemy, but the system, I think the way it was designed is doing what it's supposed to do.
Okay. And that is something that we hear, right? So I want you all to think that, yeah, I mean, in some ways it's if you, and I'm glad you brought up fairness, right? And maybe fairness versus opportunity. If you think about, or predictability, you said not fairness, but, or it might go into that though. In this case, predictability, right? Preference points might be doing the job to get you to be able to predict when you might draw that license. That might still be working, but we might have some opportunity issues with some units, if I'm hearing correctly, at least this was an example given, with at least some units, if not a lot of them, youth might not be able, or hunters, not just youth, hunters that are new to the preference point system might look at it and say, I might never draw one of those tags.
That's a fair characterization. I would say that it's predictable and consistent. The trouble is that I can accurately predict that I would have to live to be 150 premium unit.
That's a great. That's a great summary. Okay, yeah. So it's predictable, but that predictability might get you too.
I joke that the consensus in the sportsman's community is that it needs changes. There's not a consensus on what those should be. but
Yeah,
there's a
for sure.
consensus that there should be.
Yeah, definitely. And so I guess I would leave it at that too. And I will say, because we have a relatively, manageable sized crowd here tonight. And I want to give you this opportunity for those in the room. Do you have one strategy that you think is at the top of your mind as being something that would work if you have issues with the preference point system? Is there a change that you would advocate for those in the room or online?
Not sure. I believe some other states might have use them or lose them after X amount of years.
Yeah, we have, but it's 10 years. It's a 10-year purge time. So I've heard that maybe lowering that number might be a strategy. I'm not sure. We haven't done an analysis to see if that would, how many more people would have that purged, or if that would, but that's something that's been brought up. Other ideas?
So I'm not quite sure, and Provest has, please feel free to elaborate, but the response was the preference part is not working properly if the preference is going to non-residents, so the more expensive tax.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. Feel free to elaborate on that if you want to a little bit. I mean, I will say that this is why we've been talking about preference points and allocation between residents and non-residents together. There is a lot of overlap and a lot of connection there. But feel free to, if there's either a question or a suggestion for how to change the preference point system, feel free to chime in. Other thoughts on changes? Yeah.
I don't think there's a perfect fix. That's point number one. Number two, I've thought for some time that the unpredictability comes in from people switching units because they heard about a big bull or a big buck being taken in the unit. And so they're fishing for an opportunity and they take their preference points from unit Z and apply to unit A, right? Which screws up the guy who's been putting in for years for unit A. So throw it out, tie the points to the unit.
Tie the points to the unit. Okay. Yeah, I haven't heard that a lot actually, but yeah, we'll make note of that. I mean, it's
I don't even know that that's even doable or work.
Yeah, I leave that for other
It
folks.
certainly probably wouldn't be popular.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, I guess I would note that one of the most common proposed solutions is a point banking system.
Yeah.
I don't know that.
And stop for a second. What is point banking?
Yeah, so to summarize, allowing people to use a portion of their points relative to the cost of a unit. Right now, we have an all or nothing system.
Yep.
I don't know if that's something I support, just noting that that's a popular item of discussion.
Yeah, right. It has, and it was tried it for 1 year as well. I know there's comments that it might have been tried for longer, but the 1 year that it was tried, I think it was back in 2006. So it's been a little while. But I think that the 1 year that it was tried, we saw some point creep in lower point units, which you would maybe expect, right? On a high point holders, if you could bank the points beyond what you need, we'll then start putting in every year for a lower point on, and then those units might see a little bit of point creep. But there's an argument that you might need more time to see how that plays out beyond just a year, right? Any thoughts beyond that? Anything that did you hear anything about people that did banking here?
No, the 1 year time frame is too small.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, the last question though, and feel free to chime in with strategies too. I just want to throw this out there as a question, and then I'll leave you because I know, like I said, I'm not the most interesting speaker. So other states have all sorts of preference point systems as well. And I know that a lot of folks go to other states and work kind of navigate those systems, those preference point systems. Anybody want to share any strategies that you've seen from other states for preference points? Or is that, do you think that other states kind of have the same either issues or the same relatively safe system? Any ideas on that?
No, I mean, it's just that trade-off that you was talking about between predictability and that element of randomness.
Yeah.
If you made a system more like the way we manage sheep and goats. Your odds of drawing at any one time might feel higher. That doesn't necessarily change how long you end up waiting.
Yeah, let's just flesh that out a little bit. So you're saying randomness. So like if you, so right now it's built on predictability, preference point system. But if you introduce some more randomness to the system, then maybe we could address the issue of like people having a chance at some point to draw that tag. Is that what you're kind of saying?
Yeah, it increases the number of opportunities for people to draw without necessarily waiting that long time.
Yeah.
But the trade-off there is that it's not reliable. You might wait longer, you might wait a lot.
Sure,
less
it's
time.
random. Yeah.
It's a cost benefit.
Yeah, right. Anybody like kind of a more random element? Anybody want to suggest that online or in the room? That's something that we've heard, that some folks think that you introduce a little bit more of a, not scrap the preference point system, but some other states have more random element. We have a hybrid draw, for example. There's a little bit of that changes the kind of calculation a little bit, and there might be basically more of a chance to draw a coveted tag earlier than you might with just pure preference points, if you will.
We've gone through this process multiple times with the Division of Wildlife. What we found, what the division found, I believe, was that the people with like 20 or more points, they're going to vote for predictability every single time. And people with a hell of a lot less points, they're going to go for randomness. And you know, it's just who wins that contest.
Yeah,
It's
a balance.
It's,
yeah, for sure. And it's something that we got to consider, and you're right, it's a balance between like I said, it's kind of how you view the preference point system and how it's working. Oftentimes space is based on how it's working for you and the amount of points you have, right? Or the amount of points you've had in the past. So something to consider and something for us to consider. Anything else from online?
So Pro Vasquez did respond and said, or she, I apologize, fix the fact that a non-resident hunter has preference to a tag over a resident, and this would be a non-issue. Every other Western state charges more and gives out less to non-resident hunters.
Okay, I get the gist of that for sure. Yeah, I hear that loud. Okay, folks, anything else in the room that, as far as license distribution, and I know yeah. Oh, okay, online.
Yep. So we did have one piece of feedback up towards the top. Yes, so Josh asked, so his input is if we can get rid of the second draw and just go back to the main draw and then over the counter tax.
Okay.
So that was his feedback. And then Commissioner Adams, so I'm going to kind of make you go back to the beginning. Was wondering, can you explain soft cap?
Yeah.
As a term, so what does that mean? Right,
so, well, and Travis, you brought this up. I'll take a crack at it, but feel free to jump in here. So basically, the percentages that are in place in regulation are, because those are for, it has to essentially do with what's being drawn out at, it's like first choice. And well, Travis, do you want to take a crack at that actually, now that I'm saying it? It's that there's,
you just confused me.
it's that, go on, Travis.
Yeah, I'll take a crack at it. So as I said earlier, it's a soft cap, and those only apply as a first choice, right? So when you get to second, third, and fourth choice, the caps go away, okay? The soft cap means basically that non-residents are limited. In this case, my example is going to be 65, 35 units. The non-residents are capped at 35. However, if not enough residents apply for the full 65%, that's where it becomes a soft cap. Those licenses roll back into the general pool, and non-residents can draw above that 35% cap, if you will. So that's what's meant by a soft cap, if you will. The reverse of that would be a hard cap, right? That regardless, non-residents are limited to just 35% of licenses. So you got to keep in mind with that soft cap, that's how it appears sometimes that non-residents are drawing more licenses.
simply because not enough residents are applying for that particular hunt code. That makes sense?
That was way better than I could say, for sure.
Commissioner Adams says, thank you.
You bet. Thanks for the question, Commissioner Adams.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. So any other questions from online before?
No other questions. We do have a couple comments. So I guess, if people would like to continue sharing comments, perfect.
Yeah,
Okay.
so that's what I wanted to get at was, we really need your feedback on this and your input. As you've kind of heard, and I wanted to emphasize tonight, there's not a one, consensus strategy that we should do for really any one of these topics, allocation, OTC, preference points. Certainly not for the broad topic of license distribution as a whole, right? We know we've heard of some concerns and some definitely potential strategies we could use to address those concerns, but we really want to continue to hear from you to try to figure out what's on your mind, what you're seeing, and really, and I could put it this way, what you think we should be addressing first and foremost. Because I've talked about different issues that people have described, different strategies that people have brought up, but we also want to know kind of what the sort of read the pulse of the room here and figure out what should we be focusing on? Is it preference point creep? Is it resident opportunity? Is it crowding and pressure in OTC seasons? Is it all of those? And in which case we really have to look holistically and try to figure out a whole kind of array of strategies to implement either separately or at the same time to try to get to some of these concerns that people have described to us. And as I said, we're trying to do this, we're not, we've been working on this for quite some time now, and we really want to, take it to the next step and make sure that we are thinking about if we want to make proposals, making proposals for changes, and going to the commission to let them ultimately think about strategies to maybe implement or to maybe see if things are working okay, right? So we've talked a little bit about strategies, but I know some of you might have other strategies that you think about for preference points, or we talked about allocation percentages. Some of you might have other percentages that you think about. Some of you might have other ideas. Please feel free to reach out to me and I'll be available, and I have cards, and feel free to reach out to your regional staff as well. But please contact and write into the commission with your written comments, and also feel free to attend meetings in the future to share comments at those meetings, especially if license distribution is being discussed, right? I will tell you a little bit about next steps. There's actually going to be a commission meeting, a workshop, actually, it's a little bit different than a meeting, at the end of this month, at the end of August, on license distribution. And part of that is because we feel like we really need to take some time to sit down and talk about all of the different things going on with the license distribution systems that we've kind of gotten at today. But to think about all of the different aspects of the systems and potential changes. And then looking beyond that workshop, that will be, by the way, I should say, it's not a meeting, so it will be a little bit different. There might not be public, I don't think there will be public comment opportunity, but you can listen, I think, through YouTube. So the same way you listen to other meetings, it'll be open to the public to listen to. And then there will be future commission meetings. Those will be more typical of you. If you've gone to some of those where there is public comment, you can address the commission if you'd like on an agenda item that they're talking about. And I expect they might talk as early after this August workshop, as early as the September meeting. Then there will be a November meeting. So stay tuned to commission the e-news, so the rulemaking notices, agendas for the commission meetings, and please write into the commissions with what you think the problems are, if you don't think there's a problem at all, and what you think some strategies that would work for you and your community, your friends, your family. Okay. If you would like, the best thing that I could say, and if we can, maybe we could share it up on the screen, but the best thing that I would say to get information on how to send in comments to the commission, the easiest thing to do that I tell people is to Google or just go to our site, our website, and search
CPW submit public comments. Okay. CPW submit public comments, and that'll take you there. It should be the first Google result. And you might know the commission email address already. If you haven't, feel free to send comments there. Okay, sorry to go late. I apologize. Thanks for everybody for your time. Thanks for everybody online. Appreciate you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jonathan. That's obviously a topic we could spend days discussing. I appreciate you coming over, Jonathan, and covering that. I would echo exactly what Jonathan said. Stay engaged. Provide those comments, concerns, if you will, so that we can try to address those. That said, I have a couple of things I want to try to cover, and I know we're running long. I apologize. We've got a bit of a late start due to some technical difficulties. I don't want to skip the opportunity for Bob Terwilliger to maybe comment and let me explain real quick that Bob and Lester Smith are the delegates that represent sportsmen out of the Northwest region. The ideal behind the Sportspersons Caucus is that we have those elected individuals or delegates, if you will, that sportsmen can engage with and bring concerns forward to this group. Tonight's agenda was developed, with Bob and Lester's input, and that's what we try to share, that information that sportsmen are most interested in hearing from us anyhow. It's not strictly a CPW-driven agenda. Quite often we fill in some blanks because we don't have enough, sportspersons comments, if you will, to add to it. So we try to pick and choose some interesting topics as well. So, but that said, the Sportsman's Caucus, like I said, is your opportunity to really engage with CPW staff, bring those important issues forward so that we can hear them, just like Jonathan did tonight, and start trying to address those into the future. I also want to point out that there is a statewide Sportspersons group, if you will, and Bob and Lester as our regional representatives, their job, if you will, is to take these regional kind of concerns and perspectives up to that statewide level as well. The statewide Sportsperson Caucus meeting is actually coming up on August 27th. It will be local here in the Grand Junction area. I believe we're hosting it at Cameo. Is that right, John? Yes. So that's coming up soon. Stay tuned, stay engaged on that as well. With that said, I'd like to at least give Bob a minute, if he's still on there anyhow, as your delegate to address the group and share anything you would like, Bob.
Sure, yeah, thank you. So I'll just give a quick intro a little bit about myself. I've been spending time in the outdoors, hunting and fishing, backpacking, horses, mules, since I was about 6 years old. That puts it about 60 years worth of outdoor experience. The last 30 years have been in Colorado. I do happen to live in the Front Range because 2 of my 3 kids are here and 3 of my 5 grandkids are 10 minutes away. But this is my 14th year guiding. I was a head guide at Winterhawk Outfitters. And then when Winterhawk was no more, I moved on and worked for Colorado Outfitters and like I said earlier, in units 214 and 14. And currently I'm working at Budge's Lodge. A good friend of mine just bought that this past year. An opportunity to go over there, a little less work for an older guy like me. But point is, I really enjoy the outdoors. I'm going to say that I spend anywhere from 6 weeks minimum to more like 8 weeks in the backcountry across Northwest Colorado, predominantly in the Flat Tops Wilderness and Mount Zirkel areas. So, I've got a lot of exposure to those areas. I feel like I can contribute and also give good feedback. When I worked at Winterhawk, I had a very good relationship with Brian Woodrich. We talk a lot about the fishing and the elk herds and stuff like that. And on that note, with the fishing comments that went before about potentially dropping the catch count in the wilderness areas, that was my suggestion. I certainly respect the answer that I was given. The one comment I would have on that is that I would really love to be able to speak with somebody in fisheries about what I'm seeing in the different areas that I spend a lot of time in as far as the fishing, and the ups and downs of what I've seen when, because there's definitely been some ups and downs in some of those areas. and some of them I think are getting hit quite hard. You know, the Derby Creeks in 25 and 26 get a lot of fishing pressure, not only in the summer, but also archery hunters going in there and looking to supplement their meals. I know guys that are keeping, you know, they're keeping fish every time they go in there. And, you know, you take those little creeks that come out of the Derby valleys and, you know, they're great fisheries, but they can't keep taking the pressure with folks keeping fish if we want to protect the resource. So that's really all I have to say, Travis. So really pleased to be part of this, and I'm looking forward to my role and how I can help, and certainly appreciate all the great work you guys do in CPW.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate that. Sorry once again for the difficulties. We were trying to get you up first thing and just didn't work out tonight, but thanks for
yeah, no worries. Yeah, and I hope to be able to make some of these in person. It's just right now is my busy season guiding, as you can understand. In fact, I just walked in the door today about 5 o'clock from guiding fishing for the last week. So.
All right, thank you, Bob. A couple other quick notes. I want to thank the Parks and Wildlife Commissioners that sat in tonight. I know we had at least 3, Commissioner Haskett, Commissioner Adams, and Commissioner Butch, I think, was on. I don't know if Commissioner May was ever able to join or if he was just listening in, but
He was on YouTube.
he was on YouTube. Good. So I appreciate Commissioner May sitting and listening in. If I can speak for them momentarily, I think they value public input. And I don't want to inundate their emails, obviously, but they do value what sportspersons have to say. Thus the reason for them setting in tonight. I'd also add that we have a commission meeting coming up in short order on September 8th and 9th in Crane, Colorado. And once again, I would encourage our sports people out there to be engaged, show up at those commission meetings, pay attention to the agenda. Those are all posted on our website. There are some ways to reach out to your commission representatives as well. And like I said, take those opportunities and be a part of the process, if you will. With that said, I'll at least ask the commissioners that are listening if they have any comments that they would like to share briefly. I know there's a little bit of a lag there, but
Hello,
this is Commissioner Taisha Adams. Can you hear me?
yes, go ahead, Commissioner Adams.
Wonderful. I just wanted to say thank you all. Thank the staff for this incredible briefing. I loved having the facilitated conversations around allocations and being able to hear directly. We do have an all-day intensive on this topic, but again, you know, we all have a piece of the puzzle. The perspectives and information and thought partnership is absolutely critical now. And I just wanted to thank not only those who came today and shared, but also the staff who prepared and are just doing incredible work in the field. And hello to the federal commissioners as well. Thank you so much. Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams. Any of the other commissioners want to make a comment? Hearing none, I will move on. I want to take just a quick moment to thank the Northwest Region staff. You know, guys like Garrett Watson, my deputy regional manager, sitting beside me up here, Rachel and Braxton for working the behind the scenes over there. All of our AWMs that showed up this evening, the biologists and everybody that showed up to talk tonight. I really appreciate that. These guys are out there on a daily basis, kind of busting their butts for the resource of Colorado. So I'd just like to thank them for everything that they do. That said, I'd like to at least have a quick moment anyhow for anybody that's online, anybody in the room, just kind of a quick question and answer session. Anything that was off the agenda that you wanted to bring up, now is your opportunity.
We'll give online just a minute because there might be a little bit of a lag.
That and we're running really late and everybody's
Yep.
tired. While we're waiting to see if anybody online has any questions, I'll at least throw it out to my staff as well. If you guys have anything you wanted to say, Garrett, Matt, Kirby, you guys. Everybody is getting tired.
We did get a thanks for supporting our wildlife from Peter.
Well, thank you, Peter. We appreciate that. All right, without anything else, I think we'll call it an evening and call this meeting adjourned. So thank you, everybody.